So going I am going to share my screen, and that should look normal, hopefully. All right. So so I teach, so I'm a doctoral lecturer within the Department of Anthropology, and I've been teaching human anatomy, which is an upper division class within my department. And most of the students who take this class are human biology majors. So they're very grade oriented, very driven students. And so I was trying to implement um, a different grading system into this human anatomy class. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So the big problem with anatomy is it's famously challenging. There's basically an unlimited amount of content that you could be learning in an anatomy class. And students are really, really anxious about succeeding in that class. And they're all really grade oriented, especially the batch of students that tends to take this anatomy class within the anthropology department. So I was going to try to go from this sort of exam-based system, sort of a traditional 3 exam-based system of grading, to a gamified system, so that I would be able to focus a little bit more on different contexts of anatomy, be it historical context or evolutionary context, maybe current events, and just in an effort to increase student engagement with the material and student connection to the material. And I wanted to make sure that this was rigorous but non-traditional in a way that allowed them to kind of engage with it in a different way. And one thing that I'm gonna preface right off the bat is that students within the human biology major are required to take the A&P 1 and 2 sequence. So they're already required to take other anatomy courses. And so that sort of freed me a little bit to be a little bit more flexible with how I was presenting the material to them. So I was trying to go from this sort of traditional content-only assessment with these 3 exams to more of a content and context-focused system of assessment. So to that end, I had required assignments that these students had to do. So they were required to do these checkpoints, and these were testing essential concepts in the class. They were weekly, they were open notes, but they were timed. So they kind of had to prepare all of their materials before going into it. And they're just auto graded on Blackboard. So this was sort of the main format by which they were earning points in this class. And they could earn up to 11 points. And up to 55 points just from these checkpoints. And there's 11 different topics within this anatomy class. Then they had a bunch of supplemental assignments, and these were really fun. So these are supposed to be testing them on kind of the content and the context. And so we had lab assignments where students would come in and as a group work together to identify different labeled anatomical features on the anatomy models in class. And these were kind of, they were stressful in a fun way where, you're working with a team and you have you have 5 minutes to identify 5 different things on this model, and everybody's freaking out, and there's not really time to second guess. And so you're really trying out different answers and feeding off each other and growing from that spirit of collaboration. So that was one thing that I was really excited to be doing. And this is frequently used in anatomy classes. Another thing that I was doing was having my students do these context questions. And these were looking at anatomy in the context of something else. So this could be kind of clinical, it could be an evolutionary context, or it could be historical context. So I am a paleontologist, and so I study evolutionary anatomy specifically. And so I'm really interested in the evolution of all of the systems that I'm teaching them about. So I would encourage them to, read a new paper if a new paper came out, or maybe listen to a podcast episode, kind of thinking of different ways that these students can be engaging with the material. And then for all of those, articles or podcast episodes, they always had a series of questions that they would answer on Blackboard, also auto-graded. Then I also had comparative anatomy questions. So these are just application to non-human animals. So apply what we're talking about in class to something else. We all evolved from a similar or from the same evolutionary form. And so we retain a lot of the same anatomical features. And so using what you know about the relationship between this organ and this organ, identify it on a hedgehog or something like that. So this is kind of expanding how they're thinking about the material and realizing, okay, we're not just focusing on humans here. There's a whole slew of things that have the same anatomy. And then I also had them doing these lab journals. which are just exactly what they sound like. They're hand drawing, handwriting these journals, and they would hand in a actual notebook to me, and I would grade that. And this was just a really nice way of encouraging them to use this kind of traditional format for learning anatomy, which is how people have learned anatomy for, hundreds of years. And so this was also an option for them. And I should just say, all of these supplemental assignments, they're all completely optional. They didn't need to do all of them. And then they also had end of unit quizzes. So these would be closed note quizzes that earned them a lot of points, but they were a more traditional form of testing. And a lot of students are not comfortable with those. But my rule with them was you'll not be penalized for trying. So even if you do terribly, maybe you'll earn 1 point out of the potential 7 that you could earn on the quiz. So kind of reducing the pressure of these quizzes. And then I also had a series of assignments that were related more to assessing their own relationship with learning in the class. And so I had them doing these end of unit self-reflections, and where they kind of assessed which assignments they used in the class and how they wish they had allocated their time, how they might allocate their time in the next unit, just kind of encouraging this self-reflection and self-improvement within the course. And then there was also some participation points that they could earn in the class. So this system might sound, and I'm sure a lot of you are listening to this going, there's no way that I'm going to implement that many assignments in my class. Are you crazy? And I might be a little, but I think that there's also a lot of flexibility that this kind of system allows for. So if an interesting new paper came out, it was easy enough to just add an assignment and say, hey, this is an additional point that you guys can earn in this class if you do X, Y, and Z tasks related to this new thing that just happened. So I think it makes it very flexible. And there is a lot of grading associated with it, but a lot of it is automatically graded through Blackboard. And I did that very intentionally because I knew that I was going to be a lot. And I would say that the biggest kind of challenge with this system is making sure students understand how it works, because they're so used to traditional grading systems that hearing, hey, you get to decide how to allocate your time. You get to decide if you want to do all of the assignments related to this one particular topic because you're interested in it. Most of them don't really know what to do with that kind of freedom. So I think that it encouraged them to think a little bit about how they wanted to be using their time, but there was a lot of uh, start of semester confusion that I had to clarify, I guess. And the deadlines associated with this, so I had end of unit deadlines, so all those supplementary assignments were due at the end of the unit, and then those required checkpoints were due at the end of each week. So they had to be keeping up with material as we went along, but if they had fallen behind a bunch of the supplementary materials, they were able to catch up on it later on in the semester. And my students really liked this. I highlighted all the different ways that you could get an A in this class. You didn't have to do all of the assignments. You could just choose the ones that you like. If you're really good at testing, great. You can do really well on those quizzes. And then you can, pick and choose which supplementary assignments you want to do besides that. So my students liked the choice of assignments a lot. And I think it also reduced the anxiety that they felt surrounding grading. And allowed them to practice their time management a little bit more. They had to be pretty thoughtful about how they were using their time in order to get whatever grade they wanted to achieve in the class. And it did require some planning for the next unit and thinking about, how many units are available or how many points are available in unit 3. And I think that all of that was a really good practice for them for kind of real life time management. And then it also allowed me to give them an opportunity to demonstrate which assignments they actually really enjoyed so that I could try to emphasize those a little bit more in the next semester. Or if a student really engaged with the evolutionary anatomy assignments, maybe there's a primate evolution class being taught the next semester that I could encourage them to take. Or maybe there's, if they really liked the history of anatomy stuff, maybe there's history of science classes that I could recommend in the future. So I think it allows them to kind of hone in on different elements of the material that they enjoy more than others. And that is all I have for you guys. So I am going to pass this over to Austin.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Can everyone hear me? Great. So my name is Austin Bailey. I also am a doctoral lecturer at Hunter in the English department, as Julie mentioned. And thank you all for coming. This is amazing to see this many people here. As Julie mentioned, I started grading a while back in 2019, kind of in the frontier days, or what felt like the frontier days of ungrading. It was really after the pandemic that attitudes towards ungrading started to shift, and people started to take more of an active interest rather than just shock or skepticism about it. So I wanted to just share with you today for a few minutes some of the things I've been thinking about in relation to ungrading that are a bit more theoretical. When I started ungrading, it was very untheoretical. It was very praxis oriented. I was just thinking of it on my own and thinking, how could I actually do this? And it took me years after trying it out to realize that there was a community, to start doing research in that area, and now I'm at a point where I'm able to start thinking even a little bit more theoretically about it. But I wanted to kind of just preface, and then I'll jump to a couple of slides, that I think it's worth thinking about on a theoretical level, uniting the practical with the theoretical here, particularly at our juncture with AI and with questions about the future of knowledge production, knowledge ownership, and in my field with writing and teaching writing in relation to AI. So with that, let me just grab the slides real quick. So I've been thinking about ungrading in the context of moving it towards a kind of post-humanism, both in terms of going beyond the human, but also going undisciplining the humanities, my own discipline, broadly speaking. And I don't think that that this is confined to the humanities, but this is just, where I'm coming from. And I'm really interested to hear about the way others are thinking about it. This image. I adapted this presentation from one I gave at the Grad Center a few weeks ago. It was a longer workshop, but I pulled this image for it because it's an example of this artist who I Googled the word ornithography, and it's an example of an artist who records the flight patterns of birds, and sort of transcribes them onto to canvases. And I thought it was a great image to sort of start thinking about the way in which creativity is something fundamental to life, that's not only in the domain of the human, but in the domain of life itself. And I wanted to pull these quotes for us to think about. These just happened to come across my mental desk, so to speak, in the course of teaching 3 comp classes, and then also doing this semester, and then also doing my own research in the field of American literature, as well as in ungrading and stuff like that. So I'm kind of in these 2 worlds. So I'll just read this real quick. This is you'll recognize this first quote. It's from Susan Bloom's introduction chapter in ungrading. But it's an epigraph from these other authors, Richard Ryan and Edward L. Decky. From birth onwards, humans in their healthiest states are active, inquisitive, curious, and playful creatures, displaying a ubiquitous readiness to learn and explore, and they do not require extraneous incentives to do so. This natural motivational tendency is a critical element in cognitive, social, and physical development because it is through acting on one's inherent interests that one grows in knowledge and skills. This other quote is from an essay I teach my students about failure, the need to embrace failure. Failure should be welcomed, if not actively sought out, signaling as it does both the presence of creative, risky thinking and an opportunity to explore a new direction. To fail willingly in writing especially, is to be empowered by the possibilities that emerge. This is in the context of writing instruction. And then this last one is a bit more theoretical. It's from a book by Nathan Snaza. Let me propose now a somewhat polemical, extremely speculative project. Instead of seeing human literacy events as the signs of a human rupture from all other beings, I'm going to take literacy as an animate practice. That is, some animals make marks that circulate in various media with effective agency and that are in turn attended by other animals. One hopes thinking this way releases us from spending so much energy around arguing about the humanities and their importance. And so Snazza is thinking about how we in the humanities, but I think this could be applicable to other disciplines, are so anxious about shoring up the relevance for the humanities. And what happens if we start to think about the humanities in an undisciplined and kind of post-humanist context? I recently published an article with this really great person, Carolyn Wilkinson, in the Journal of Basic Writing that offers a kind of intervention on the ungrading conversation. I just wanted to pull, I know this is self-promotion, and I apologize for that, but I just wanted to pull quotes from this because I wanted to sort of accent something that I think is important about ungrading in particular. So one of the things we kind of claim in this article is that um, ungrading is a little bit can be understood as a little bit different than other alternative assessment practices insofar as it emphasizes kind of holistic assessment, metacognition, but also it's resituation of affective relationships in the classroom. And I don't, and I am a little hesitant with this because I think that leads folks to think that maybe this means that ungrading is like a sort of a therapy session with your students. Not that there's anything wrong with that per se, but I don't think of this as being, necessarily, leading to too much like disclosure of personal information or something like that. But it's really more about thinking about how I think ungrading in opening up the question of assessment and creating, as Ingrid put it, which is a really important point, a reduced stress environment. You create this kind of culture of openness and fluidity that goes back and forth between student and teacher, but also student to student. And this is the other point that we were kind of thinking about, is that if ungrading prompts us to think, to attend to and reorient effective aspects and registers of learning, where risk taking is permitted. That is such a huge thing that I see over and over again every semester with ungrading, is students feel okay and empowered to take risks. This creates a different set of affective identifications for teachers, and I think this is really important. That in other words, it kind of short circuits or stops, it suspends us in certain ways from just habitually reacting to the way we do to student work. We're so primed to kind of be technical in the way we approach student work that we forget the holistic often, and we forget the human or the whole person in the assessment process. And so ungrading, I think, kind of asks us to, or it kind of creates a culture and a system, an environment in which your certainty about your students' work is actually challenged a bit and slowed down. So I've talked about this before. The way I approach it is, I think this is what Julie meant when she said there's full, quote unquote, full on ungrading, full contact ungrading, which is not the way, there's no monolith. There's not the way you need to do it. But the way I approach it is to have these learning narratives. I've talked about these before, where students, so this is the nuts and bolts at the middle and the end point of the semester, they write these short narratives where they reflect on their holistic learning process, and they propose a course grade for themselves in the midterm around now, October for the fall, a holistic grade course grade that's tentative, and then at the end of the semester a final one that's final. But we sort of decide on those grades together. But I think one thing to highlight, if any of you read the article that Roberta sent out, the blog about the equity issue and ungrading, I really try to stress with students that this is not a negotiation, that they're not coming into my office or going online, submitting their essays, trying to argue like in a court of law, what their grade is. It's really, I try to look at it more at like in the spirit of collaboration as an open-ended exchange where I'm making myself as a teacher interested in what my students are interested in, what their self-reporting is interested in, and how they view their own progress. Which doesn't mean that I think it's important to also emphasize that this doesn't mean that knowledge and correctness goes away. It just means that we're sort of loosening the connection between knowledge and assessment, or rethinking that connection. So I'll end with this. I don't want to go on too long, but my kind of larger question I'm thinking about is this: if becoming human is sometimes painful and traumatic, one of the things we talk about a lot in my classes when we talk about ungrading as a subject is the traumas that are associated, whether micro or macro, that are associated with being graded. So if becoming human is somewhat painful and traumatic, if it entails institutional forms of forgetting our creaturely creativity and our joy for learning, and this is something I know is coming up in the next presentation, then how might we go about embracing ours and our students' creatureliness in the classroom? How does, and this is really what I'm thinking about, as my department thinks more about the relationship between AI and writing assessment. How does fostering this playfulness and openness to experimentation and worthwhile failure affirm a life of thought and expression beyond or within our new cultural terrain of AI and machine-based learning? So those are some of the things I'm thinking about. I'll end there.
So now we have to follow Austin? No.
So pass it, yeah, Steph.
Great, thanks. Anyway, hi everybody. My name is Stephanie Margolin. I'm here with my colleague Meg Bausman. We both work in the library and we are co-teaching for several semesters now, co-teaching a section of the library's course, Library 100, a one-credit course. And I think you can read what's on the slide, which gives you a little background on the course. It's important to note it's a one-credit class. We get a lot of seniors. The students who are here because they need a credit. They do not have a burning desire to become librarians or like genius researchers. They need a credit. And I think that some of that makes it hard to sort of give them that pivot that ungrading takes, but I think it's worth sort of grounding us in that reality. So it's adapted from, it's an online, almost fully asynchronous course, adapted from a course that was developed by our colleagues, Sarah Ward and Jennifer Newman. We taught it for several semesters, graded. We'll talk about that. And then we flipped to ungraded for the past 3 semesters. We are heavy on the feedback. You'll get that from listening to us because we're just heavy on talking. We're heavy on notes in our slides, like we're heavy on feedback for our students. Okay, Meg, you can flip the slide. Okay, so this is in the before times when things were graded. It's a very, very structured course. So every week a new module opens on Blackboard. It opens on the same day every week. Students have to finish their work on the same day every week, and then the new one opens, right? It's just like a steady stream. The grades were weighted depending on what kinds of things we're asking students to do. We had a lot of self-reflection. Those reflection grades are usually like 2 points. More complex things are 4 points. When we had them do a search in a database, that might be 6 points. And then for the final assignment, which was basically a review of previous assignments, that held a little more. That was 15% of the total potential points. And then we had office hours that sometimes were completely optional. And then a few semesters in, we said they had to come at least 3 times. So we were seeing some problems that were not annoying, but frustrating, that probably sound very familiar. Our students were overly focused on points. They were constantly like, but wait, I know I'm late, but could I still have some of the points, right? It was, and these weren't a lot of points, right? Nothing was 100, things were like 4. And we spent a lot of time alone and together trying to determine if they did this mistake, like how much are we grading for the correctness and how much are we grading for just the doing it? And so we are like doing all this mental gymnastics to figure it out. I was always like, oh, Meg, you're an easier grader and they hate me when I grade because I'm like so mean. And so a lot of that. And then when we gave feedback, we were just explaining to justifying so that if they came to us, we like had covered our bases, like this is why we took away the points. So that was not what we were looking for in a class, even a 1-credit class. So here are our big goals, right? Similar to what we heard from Ingrid and from Austin. We wanted to foster agency, encourage critical thinking, promote curiosity. Curiosity is like the backbone of research. Like, we really wanted students to be curious about lots of things. So that, and we felt like our current grading was sort of deficit based. So you can do the next slide. Magically, ACERT came to rescue us, as it often does. So was it 18 months ago, Julie, that we did the podcast club? So 3 semesters back, I was a participant in the podcast club called Transforming Our Teaching. And each time we met, we had an option of like a bunch of podcasts to listen to. And then we would have a conversation, and they were themed. So right away, we made some changes. Right away, after listening to a podcast about how students often don't know what office hours are for, and they're often put off by the name office hours, we flipped right away to calling them student support sessions. Like, that was like an immediate, I was like, Meg, we have to make this change. I was also very, very taken with the idea of feedback. And this was really central. We made this change also right away. And I think we've talked about it. We continue to strive to do this. This idea that, number one, students focus less on feedback when they're also given points, because it's hard for us to not like feel bad or good about the points we got, and then we neglect the feedback. So removing that from the equation, giving feedback that focuses maybe on just 1 or 2 things instead of everything in the lesson. And then also giving feedback that people can use to improve for the future and not just feel bad about the past, because it's very rare that we have people redo a module. So we want them, we try really hard to target that attention and say, like, frame it as advice, right? This is what you can do in the future. In this podcast club, we also talked a lot about ungrading and sort of got jazzed about it. So then we read our Susan Bloom like everybody else. And then we made some bigger changes. And so Meg's going to tell us about those changes.
Hi, everybody. I'm so psyched to be here with you all. And I also want to just give a shout out to my great partner and colleague, Stephanie Margolin. The last 6 semesters doing this class collaboratively has really been a highlight of my work. I've really enjoyed it. So I'm delighted to even take this further and get a chance to talk with people about it. So here's what we did. Having sort of reached this point and getting inspired, we decided to decenter our grading and try to take on some practices of ungrading. Now, there's no one perfect or right or wrong way to do ungrading. So this is what we did. This is what we adapted. That first, and it took a couple of tries. So this is take 1, fall semester of 2023, just a year ago. Instead of doing the structured, 2 points, 4 points, 6 points everything just got a point. Everything got a point. If you did it, you got a point. And then we gave feedback through one of the written assignments where there's a place to give feedback in Blackboard. And we continued to have our weekly open student support Zoom sessions. We then, when we started thinking about how to engage students around grading, we wanted there to be a couple of opportunities for them to engage with us around this. And so one would be our unmidterm self-assessment. And we created a guided exercise for them to work through where they would review their work and think a little bit about what they were doing well, where their struggles were, what they had actually learned, where they still had questions, where they had feedback from us that indicated this was an area of need. And then we would meet with them in a 15-minute Zoom conference to have that conversation. And one thing that we would explicitly ask would be, if we were grading today, if we had to give a letter grade today, what do you think it would be? So we got that conversation going. We're not giving you individual points or grades for each exercise you complete, but there will be a grade. And we're going to work on this together over the course of the semester. And then likewise, at the end of the semester, we would have a final assignment and another self-assessment and another meeting in which we would set the grade. And so what did we find? We found some improvements For sure. And we had some students saying that they were feeling more engaged with the work and the learning than in the earning of points, which is certainly what we were aiming for. But we also found that the cycle of modules being opened and closed at the same hour, the same day every week really presented problems with getting the feedback to students in a meaningful way. So if the module closed on Wednesday and the new one opened on Wednesday at the same hour, Stephanie and I at that time were trading our grading week to week. And if we were having a very busy week, who knows when the grading would happen? Maybe it would wait till Monday, and then students would get their grades on Monday when they had already maybe completed or maybe not even started the next module, but they were disengaged already from the module that we were giving them feedback on. And it just sort of went into the ether. And that was very frustrating for us. We also found that even though we weren't, giving points in the same way anymore, there were still points and they were still collecting them. And they would come to us and say, I earned all my points and I tried hard, and that meant I learned something. I think I deserve an A. Even if there were very clear, demonstrable evidence that they had not learned or were struggling in an area. So next semester, we did a little more. Hang on, my slide didn't go forward. Here we go. So one thing that we did was we changed the structure of when the modules open and closed. Now they open on Wednesday at midnight and they have till Sunday to complete them. And Stephanie and I, this really ended up being a tremendous gift to ourselves, committed to grading Monday and Tuesday. And instead of trading weeks, we split the class. And now every time students go in to start a new module, they have feedback to review from the previous week to apply to their ongoing work. We also pared down the whole point thing even more. They get a point for turning in the written assignment. One written assignment, we call it a contact point each week. We give them feedback for all the exercises in the module in that own place. We have been explicit. This does not mean correct. This means there's feedback waiting for you. We also started structuring that the weekly Zoom support meetings so that the first one was not only required, but it was required in the second week of the course. Everyone had to come for a support meeting, and we had several groups of them. And at that time, we really dissected what ungrading looked like. We talked about a welcome letter that we had given to everybody at the beginning of the class, and we reviewed a survey that we do in week 1 about people's worries and perceptions about ungrading. We also decided that if we're going to have the students do self-evaluation, we have to teach them how to do it. We can't just say 6 weeks in, now evaluate yourself. So we built in, using the journal function in Blackboard, a weekly self-assessment. It's really quick. It's like 3 standard questions. Did you do the work on time? Did you understand the directions? What are your questions? And then we throw in 2, maybe 3 questions that are particular to the content of the material for that week. We ask students to specifically state what they learned, what they have questions about, what they're going to do to get those questions answered. We don't review it. It's for them. It's available to us, and they know that we may look into it from time to time, but we're not giving them feedback on the journal entry. That's for them. And so then when they come to the self-assessment in the midterm and at the final, they have something to go back and look to from each week about their own reflection about what they're learning and how they're doing, in addition to our feedback. Here are some lessons that we learned. One was, ungrading sounds like less work, like you're not doing something. It's And we've in fact had students sort of wonder, like, are we doing our jobs? Is this a way for us to like not teach? But it's not. It is so not less work. We really put a lot of time into this. And as Stephanie said, we know that we are actually in sort of a particular bucket here, co-teaching a 1-credit elective, not 3 full courses with 25 students in each. Yeah, it is more work, and yeah, we had each other, and yeah, we didn't have as big a load as I think some of you, as I know many of you have. We also really, really took in that it was not one major change at one time. that this was something that happened over time. It was a series of small changes that we were sort of engaged in this very intense reflective process throughout, and that we really took on this whole action research approach to how we were working with our students and how we were making changes in the class. We really took in this idea of online and asynchronous doesn't mean disconnected. We really wanted to have conversation with our students. And we really worked toward that within the medium, that we were not in silos, we weren't disconnected, even though we were online and we were asynchronous. And the last bit on this slide, as I said earlier about the change in the scheduling of when the modules open and how the grading works, was a gift to ourselves. It really was. That was an incredible piece of self-care, as it turns out. It has really improved sort of the flow of the life of our class and our burden of grading. And in turn, it seems like it really took good care of our class and our students as well. All right, this is our wrap up, which is the joy. And Stephanie is going to bring the joy.
I could talk about the joy. So I would start by saying that Meg and I ended last spring semester going like, we are really happy. Like, this really worked. So we felt very connected to this idea of that our teaching had turned more joyful. We write our students feedback every week, and our feedback probably does get longer. It is probably too long, but it feels like a little, like, not a love letter, because that's a little over, but like a little friendly letter that we send to them, telling them not just like this was right or wrong, but like showing them that we're trying to understand how they approached whatever it was they were doing that week. And it also feels like a very real conversation. And so it's our favorite example, but that last semester, when we were doing something about news, we had one student who was very, very engaged in that and just gave us a very big answer that was more than they were usually giving. And so we wrote in the feedback, hey, you seem really engaged in this. What's your own personal history with news and your interest in that? And he came to the next support session because he wanted to talk about what we had written in the feedback and talk more about the news. So we felt like that was really sort of coming full circle for us. And then coming full circle with ACERT, we actually spent this summer doing the 12-week writing program. And we have a short article that is super almost ready to go about the course, which is why it was so easy to do the slides, right? Because we had already thought about our course in this way. And yeah, it's the crazy week of the semester, and we are almost finished having 15-minute Zoom conferences with all of our students. So thank you.